All right, when you're looking at piecewise functions, we're going to graph them. There's a couple different ways you can approach this, okay? And so I want to keep that in mind as we go about doing this problem. All right, the first way, and I'm going to go ahead and use tables, okay? So the first way to do this is to use tables. So the piecewise function g of x is equal to 3 if x is less than or equal to -1, and it's equal to x minus 2 if x is greater than -1. So what I can do here, if it's 3, I'm going to make a table. Now, this is a little bit of a waste of time, and you're going to see. I'm going to make an XY table. Now, when I make my XY table, I'm going to use 3 points. I need to use 3 points that fit this domain. So I'm wanting to know when x is less than or equal to -1, okay? And so, and actually, you do want to include this. That was a little off. Fit the domain, but you also want to include that number. So less than or equal to -1. So I need to include -1, and I need two x values that fit that domain. So what are two values that are less than -1? What about -2 and -3? So I'm going to use that point and 2 points below it because I'm looking at points less than -1. And so what the goal is here is I'm going to find the y values that correspond to these x's here. Okay. So when x is -3, what is y? Well, it's a trick question because it's 3. There's no variables here. So if x is -3, what's the y going to be? What's my function going to be? It's going to be 3. When x is -2, what's it going to be? It's still going to be 3. You see, there's no variables here. When x is -1, what's y? So in this case, regardless of what x is, like -1 or below, regardless of what value you pick, the y is going to be 3. This is called a constant function. Okay, so I'm going to graph that. Now, before I graph that, I'm going to look here. I want to be careful and not get too far ahead of myself. This -1 is a critical point here. And I'm going to evaluate, is that an open or a closed circle? Well, it's got an equal to, so this is going to be a closed circle. So it's closed because of the equal. Okay, and now I'll come into play here in a moment because I'm going to graph, and this graph's going to have two pieces. So I'm going to plot these points, and I'm going to have a closed points for all three of these. So -3, 3, -2, 3, and -1, 3. Now, there's my graph. It's a constant function, so it's just a flat line. Okay, so now next thing I'm going to do is what domain is this for? This is for x is less than or equal to -1. So I'm going to connect the dots and I'm going to draw an arrow in one direction. Basically, I'm drawing a ray here. Okay, so I'm drawing an arrow in one direction. Which direction am I going? Am I going less than -1 or greater than -1? Well, I'm going less than. So I'm going to start at -1 and go left because left is less. And so that would be my graph for that piece of the function. Okay. Next, I'm going to make a table for this, x minus 2. Okay. Now, in this case, I'm going to pick x is greater than -1. Now, I know -1 is not technically in that domain, but I still need to include -1 in there because that's going to give me a point to start my graph. Okay, so -1 and then greater than -1, I need to pick two x values that fit those parameters. You can pick any two you want, but I'd make this easier on yourself. I'm going to pick 0 and 1. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug those values into my function here. I'll write them over here. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll write this. And you don't have to, I'm overdoing it here. -1 minus 2, 0 minus 2, and 1 minus 2, okay? So you're down $1, you lose 2 more dollars. Now you're down 3. 0 minus 2, -2. 1 minus 2, -1. Okay? Now, before I get too carried away, and I often do, and I'm going to draw an arrow here. This means it's equal. I'm going to look at the -1 here, this critical point where the graph a lot of times makes a jump. At -1, it's greater than. Now, notice this greater than does not include an equal sign. So this one is going to be, when it doesn't include it, you're going to have to put an open circle because an open circle implies it does not include that exact point. All right, so this is going to be open, okay, because it's not equal. Okay. So I'm going to plot these points, but when I plot -1, -3, I'm going to put an open circle there because it's technically does not include, that point is not included. But right after -1 is when the graph starts. So 0, -2, and then 1, -1. Okay. And so when is this graph true? Well, it's greater than -1. So it's greater than -1 would be -1 and above. Okay, so it's going to be -1 and above. So I'm looking in terms of x. I'm going to start at -1, and then I'm going to go above. So I'm going to trace the graph to where it's those values above. Okay, and it goes on forever. So I'm going to put an arrow here. And so those are my piecewise. That's my piecewise graph.